And then I'm going to share my screen. Let's do this. Whoop. Let's see. Can you guys see the whole thing in presentation mode?
We see your next slide as well.
Yeah,
No,
we're seeing the presenter notes.
Yeah, that's the cheater part. It shouldn't be showing you my presenter notes, right?
Try under the display settings.
Fantastic. Thank you. So this is a snippet of our agenda. And so really what we want to do here is I do want to start with introductions, because I know Jane's here as one and we're supposed to have 2 new members. But before we do that, I do want to talk a little bit about logistics since we're in this new format, and then we'll also go through the agenda review. So because we're in a different format today, the things I wanted to highlight is that in the bottom of your screen in the middle, we should see the hand, you know, the little hand that says raise hand. And that would be, if we get to a point where there's a number of people who want to talk at the same time, I think that little raise hand will be the tool that I would prefer that we use in place of the chat, so that we can try to keep the side conversations to a minimum. Let's try to use the raise hand, although I know it's challenging and we will inevitably talk over each other at some point. Does everybody see where that is?
I don't have a raise hand on this screen. I sometimes do, but not right now.
Hit participants at the bottom.
Participants. Oh, raise hand. Okay, got it. Thanks.
Okay, great. So let's see. Yep, before we jump into agenda review, I do want to do introductions and give Matt, do you want to do a small welcome?
Sure, Katie, thank you. I just basically want to echo what Katie said. We're really grateful and thankful for the SRP folks taking the time to be part of this process. It's a really important part of maintaining trust with the community that we're doing what we say we're going to do through the pavement bond measure. We've had a number of folks on this committee that have been here since the inception, and it's pretty spectacular to me that people have that kind of dedication to this work, and really appreciate it. And also want to welcome Janine and David Starnes, who I'm not sure who's popped on, but as new members of our committee.
Thanks, Matt. So I do want to go ahead and jump into introductions, and not knowing how many people were going to be on the call, I made a list so we can just go in order. So we would start with John, although I don't see him on the call. And so when you're introducing yourself, I think specifically for Janine, it would be great just to give a tiny bit of background of your involvement of the SRP up till now. So we'll start with committee members and then we'll go over to the staff. So I don't know that John is not here. Alan is not here. Jim is not here. So Janine, you're first.
They say half the battle's showing up. So yeah, thanks for inviting me to participate in this. I guess I'm your new version of Mel Damewood, who you probably all know from prior web and SSRP conversations. I've been at UWeb for about 12, 13 years. Before that, I worked for the City of Eugene. So very familiar with our work together. We partner a lot on these road construction projects because a lot of times they implicate eWeb infrastructure underneath it. And so I hope to, contribute and bring some perspective and connect the dots for both of our organizations. And thanks for the invite.
We're glad you're here. So John, you're next.
This is John Quilter, and I've lived here in Eugene about 10 years now. And as I recall, I've been on the committee approximately 5 years, I believe, and I found it interesting. I've learned a lot, and hopefully I've provided some useful input along the way.
Matt, you're up.
Yeah, it looks like Matt Roberts is next. Following suit. I've actually been in Eugene about 27 years, and I represent the University of Oregon, and I've been there about 23 or 24 years, so a while. Enjoy the work on this group, enjoy the group as a whole, and This year, I hope to make sure that McLean gets resurfaced. I'm lobbying already.
So Gary, it's your turn and then Sue.
Yeah, Gary Wildish, with Chamber Construction. I've been retired 14 years. And I got wrangled into this from the start, I guess. I didn't have much of a choice. A guy came up behind me and grabbed my arm and said, "You're on the committee. You work for the City of Eugene." And good man, miss him. And Janine, nice to see you on. I've been on a number of different things with Janine, so this is great. And welcome.
Sue, you're next.
Okay, yeah, I guess that's me. I'm Sue Walling. I'm pretty about to retire as an ICU nurse at the at Riverbend. I'm on the committee. I've been on the committee for a number of years. I don't know how long. And probably mostly representing bicycle interests, theoretically pedestrian as well, although I'm not much of a pedestrian really. Was just recently appointed to the Active Transportation Committee too, which Alan Hancock also is, so we're well represented there. I have gotten to learn a lot. Unfortunately, I forget a lot of what I learned, so that when I'm with people and they say, "Ah, damn it, I don't know why the city doesn't do this or why the city doesn't fix that road," or, you know, it's like, I should be able to tell them, and I sometimes can, but I wish I was better at it. But I learn a lot, and it's good to have some input. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, Matt, you're first for staff.
Sorry about that. Matt Rodriguez, Acting Public Works Director.
Jennifer Willer, I'm the acting city engineer.
Hi, everybody. Eric Johnson, Surface Operations Manager with the Maintenance Division.
Hi, I'm Rachel Love. I'm a project manager under Katie and Jennifer, and I've also been managing the pavement preservation program this past year.
And I'm Katie Marwitz. I'm acting principal engineer.
I'm Scott Milovich. I'm the division manager for Public Works Maintenance.
I'm not sure that Kathy or Nick are here. So Brian, you're up. If you're still here. Maybe he left us. He's had enough already.
Hey, can we all say you need to unmute yourself?
Yeah, unmute yourself.
Yeah, that's the phrase typically. Brian Richardson, Public Affairs, and I would like to give a special shout out to Sue for all the work you've done over the last 10 months doing that ICU nurse thing. That's a tough job. So thank you.
And I think Tammy, you're the last one up.
So I'm Tammy Smith and Public Works Admin, and I do finance. So I track pond costs.
It's very important. Thank you, Tammy. So going back to our agenda, next I'd like to talk about selecting a facilitator. If my memory serves me correctly, I think that John, you've done it a couple of years, and I think before that, Ollie was the facilitator. I didn't want to make any assumptions, wanted to leave that up to the group if there was other volunteers or wanted to make a change or stay the same. So I leave that up to the group.
I nominate John.
Second.
Well, I've been the facilitator for 2 years. I think it's been at least 2 years, so I would be perfectly willing to pass it on to somebody else. I don't find it a particularly onerous project to do. It seems to me that staff does a pretty good job in keeping the meeting rolling. So if there's any other volunteers, be sure to step forward.
Then I'd have to nominate Matt. He doesn't do anything, so he can handle it.
Matt Rodriguez can't do it. I don't think so.
Nice try, Matt Roberts.
Not sure that I'd be good at this because I'm not sure I can make every meeting.
Okay, so if you're declining, John, are you interested in continuing in the role?
Hey, there doesn't seem to be anybody jumping into the position, so I'll sign on for another year.
That's great. You're just so good at it, John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Great. So I do think it's important as we start that we go over this, the SRP mission again. I need to move my gallery over here. There we go. And per the resolution, the SRP will prepare an annual report separate and distinct from the report prepared by the outside auditor, documenting the city's use of the bond proceeds and noting whether the bond proceeds were used in compliance with the term of its resolution. And I think that's really important, and noting that really the role of staff here is just to, you know, help the conversation keep going and being resources and really setting up the meetings, but really we appreciate the role of this committee in helping, you know, prepare that report and meeting the needs of this resolution. I also put the link here to the SRP webpage. And Janine, you specifically, I welcome you and everybody else to go and review the other documents that we have, and you can kind of get a historical knowledge of what we've done to date. So next, I want to jump into talking about 2020, a review of the year, kind of thinking about what we would do if we were on the tour bus together, even though we're not today. And so talking about 2020, what I want to start with is, you know, talking about COVID and how that changed the work that we do and how we, you know, kept things moving ahead, and also reviewing the bond projects that we completed this year. And then also about the important role in economic recovery that our work group is part of, and then also looking ahead to 2021. So I included this, you know, in acknowledgement that we're not all on the bus today, but I wish that we were. And I envision Doug Rubel, our construction lead, you know, driving us around on this great bus, looking at all the wonderful projects that we do. And we can just pretend that we're doing that today, and even though that we're not actually there.
I don't remember that bus being particularly the bus we were on, but
you know,
it's close.
Yeah, I've been on that bus and I really like that bus. That was more of a hop on, hop off, where ours is more of a you get on and you have to listen to me speak the whole time. So talking about the timeline of 2020, really we started January and February, like most typical years. We're finishing our design, getting ready to advertise and bid a bunch of projects. And then really I selected this graphic because it said, you know, in March, really our world turned upside down a little bit. All of a sudden we're in, you know, this global pandemic. And so we really had to change the way that we do a lot of our business. And we've made changes to include things, even how we do business in the office. We're now doing, you know, e-contracts, e-signatures. We're able to route things way faster than we ever have been before. The majority of our staff is now working from home. We have great resources that we've been able to provide them the tools that they need so we can keep our design processes moving forward. And so after we, like everybody else, kind of stumbled through that and got going, really April through the end of the year is just work continues. We had an enormous amount of work take place this year. Work on it goes, and I will tour you through those. So this map, this is an excerpt of the map that we produce every year. You can see there's projects all over town, and those are not only road projects, but those include stormwater projects, wastewater projects, parks projects. So really there's a huge amount of work planned for 2020. And so when we start our tour, imagine that we're all together and we're starting a tour, but this time we're starting kind of on the east end of Eugene, over by the university area, and we're starting in Garden Avenue. And so the next couple slides will be Garden Avenue. It's Garden Avenue and Walnut were together, and you the for state of the street. This project rehabbed Garden, Walnut, and then we also included Moss and parts of Villard by using bond funds, and then also we use gas tax funds for the and then these are some photos of it after. The project was managed by Rachel, who's here, but it included some really great pieces that improvements for pedestrians, bicycles. We had traffic calming elements. And I thought it's a really successful project and turned out quite nicely. So going from Garden, we would turn and go south a little bit, south of the university to this area that would be 19th and Fairmount, which is a project that's scheduled to advertise in just the next couple of weeks. It's a project that's going to rehab 19th Avenue from Agate over to Fairmount, and then a really large section of Fairmount. It's going to include improvements for pedestrians and bicycles. We'll include doing some bulb outs, orienting some of the intersections to make, you know, better crossings. And then also it's added, where my cursor is here, some Prees rock site improvements that are going to be included in this project that are funded through our parks group. So that'll be coming out for construction, well, advertisement very soon. And then continuing down 19, we'll go through the 19th project that was completed this last summer. And if you remember, 19th Avenue was started in 2019 and then had to overwinter, and then it was completed this last summer. So after we went down 19th, we would swing down and check in on the South Willamette Street improvements. And this project is one, we know that our about this project for several years now, waiting for it as it's iterated. And it's one that has a combination of federal funds and a number of other local funds, including the bond funds. It started in 2020. The work that was done in 2020 included a lot of underground work, utilities, that also included ramp upgrades, some sidewalk, and starting of the stormwater treatment facilities. Now, they did take a small break over the winter, but we anticipate that it will start again in March, and it will likely go through the majority of 2021.
I might make the suggestion that anybody who's not speaking might want to put their system on mute, because any kind of background noise will interfere with Katie's speech.
Thanks for the suggestion, John. That's great. Okay, so after we were driving north on Willamette Street past those improvements, we would come across another set of improvements in the Midtown area. And this one is just a little bit farther north on Willamette. And this includes 20th Avenue, portions of Oak Street, and Willamette Street. So this project was moved to be into 2021 because of the incorporation of Willamette Street itself. So Willamette Street was, we are planning to convert it to a two-way street, and that's an outcome of the Central Eugene in Motion process that was completed recently. So we are going to include that work in this upcoming project that will include a new traffic signal at the intersection of 18th and Willamette, and then it will change how that block of Willamette Street functions. It will now be a two-way. That'll be funded through gas tax, while the other pieces of this project are bond funded. Okay, another project up in the Midtown area that's going to happen in 2021 is a project that includes those pieces of street you see there, 17th, 19th, and Mill Street. Along 17th, that's going to include some bike improvements. It'll become a greenway, a neighborhood greenway. Then we'll also capture Mill Street and portions of Oak as well. We also have the other piece of a Midtown project is going to be Lincoln Street. And a big piece of how this all puts together is we're currently working with transportation planning on refining a communication plan that shares information about not only the specific projects like we do here, but also kind of as a whole to the area to say, yes, we're going to be doing this group of projects, and here's how we're going to sequence them and build them so that we're not, or that so that we kind of minimize the impacts and we don't have overlapping closures. So we're working on that communication plan to give the big picture plan for the summer. So after that Midtown area, we would, on our tour, next stop, we would go west and we would visit a contract that was both Polk Street and Chambers Street. So the first is what you see is Chambers. Chambers Street is going to have some, it has a lot of ramp improvements. It had some pipe work, and then the surface is going to be rebuilt. It's one that this year, the ramp improvements were completed, and then the surface treatment will be completed in the spring of this year. Now, it was paired with Polk Street, just between 6th and 7th. These are the pre-construction photos of Polk. And then it was completed and paved this fall. And so just the Chambers piece of that is holding over to this spring.
Sorry, I didn't hear what section of Chambers on Chambers, what streets or what?
Sure, it goes from 11th to 13th.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
Can I ask a question about the Chambers?
absolutely.
The crosswalk that goes in connecting that park with the other side on
Yeah.
Chambers, around 15th or 17th or 8th. That now has a dip. Is that staying like that? That's weird.
For the time being, it will stay. So that was done as part of a Safe Routes to School project that was completed. And because of the cross slope of the roadway, we needed to lower that to make that compliant for someone crossing. So that portion of Chambers Street, we are planning on repaving in the next couple of years, which will come through and redo the surface on both sides of that crossing. So for temporary, it's going to stay like that. But long term, when the rest of Chambers is rehabbed, that'll be smoothed out.
It's just different. Usually you see those crosswalks raised and this one's dips. I thought maybe that was an easier way of doing it or something.
Nope, it's just that over time, when Chambers was built, it was built to grade. And then I think, 1 or 2 iterations ago, we just added surface on top of it and then added surface on top of it. So it's got quite a crown on it. So when we go to do a crossing, because now we are really focusing on making sure that we get that compliant crossing, it's actually a dip.
Yeah. Slows people down.
It does. So kind of our last stop on the official tour, I wanted to mention a couple of path projects we have going on. And both of these path projects are instances where we were able to leverage bond funds to make a really great project. So the first one is the West Bank Path project. It's a combination of street bond for the bike ped component and also parks bond funding to do the lighting. And that project started this fall, summer and fall, and they completed the majority of the lighting prep work this fall. And then starting in the spring of 2021, they'll go in and do the surface work. The second piece of path project that I wanted to mention is the South Bank Path. And that's a project that Rachel is managing it as well. That's actually a combination of federal grant funds and then bike ped bond funds. And Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that that's scheduled to start in the next month or so. Is that right?
We're only going to be doing a couple of tree removals this next month, and then the rest of the project will be later in the spring.
Gotcha. Okay, so I wanted to next move on to 2020 at a glance, just to give some of the facts that we usually talk about when we're driving around in our bus. So looking at the total ACP tons, asphalt.
Katie,
Yes.
it looks like there's a question.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe it's me. There was a couple of things. That bike path thing, that's a huge thing for the people out in the River Road area. I've had more people complain about the fact that they won't ride on that path at night. And I'm anxious for that lighting, but also the improvement really needs to be done. And so that's fantastic. The work on 17th from Oak to Alder, is the intention there of making that slower moving so that it encourages bicycle and ped on that specific street other than other ones?
I think that we're adding some features that include like curb bulb outs. So that it comes and has the traffic calming effect for vehicles traveling east-west.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Jennifer, thank you for telling me there was hands. I didn't have my panelists set up so I can see. I can see Janine also has her hand raised.
I hate to go all the way back to the first slide, but the Garden Way project, I met some friends for a bike ride, God, in the fall, sometime before it was raining a whole lot, at Knickerbocker Bridge, and we went across at Otson and then kind of found our way onto Garden. And I was just curious if there was some improved connectivity plan for that section of kind of bike route that gets you as you're trying to head, is that east?
I know that our transportation planning group really regularly looks at things from a higher level of how can we make improved connections, but that's not one that I'm super familiar with, but I'm certainly happy to follow up on it.
I think it was a little bit more confusing because maybe Matt, you probably know, I think there's a parking garage being built back there.
Mm-hmm.
So even the detour sign was kind of confusing for bicyclists to find Garden Way. Anyway, it was months ago. It could be totally different today than it was months ago. I was just kind of curious because that portion of bike connectivity has always been kind of rough as you get back onto Franklin Street and Boulevard. But what an improvement.
Thanks for that input. Sue?
Yeah, two things. First is that the one on 17th, I hear that the High Street protected bikeway is supposed to happen sometime soon. So are there plans to make sure that we don't pave the street and then tear it up for the bikeway or?
Absolutely. Yeah, we actually, just this morning, I was having a meeting with the two project managers. So we're working on, especially when there's overlaps, we're working on making sure that those coordinate. And in the instance of 17th, I think it shows so high. I was trying to think if it showed. I think our plan for High is that we're actually going to stop it on either sides of High so that when the bikeway comes through, we can be consistent. But in short, yes, we're working really hard to make sure that those things are consistent so that we're not building and then unbuilding. That's not an efficient use of the funds.
Okay. And then the other question is, do we have any idea when the South Bank Trail is going to open again? I mean, it's been a really long time.
Right. I don't have a good answer for that. Jennifer, can you speak to the timeline as it relates to riverfront development?
I think that we'll have to just follow up on that because I don't have the schedule for the park plans handy right here in front of me.
We can follow up and I can provide that to you.
Okay, thanks. People are always asking, is that thing ever going to open? You know, and then we see pavement happening. So it's like, that's encouraging, but it's still all blocked off and they've blocked it off very effectively. We can't even get around the barriers to go check it out on our own, which is what bicyclists usually do.
So it's appropriately closed. Okay, more to come. So going back just to some general facts about 2020, you can see we have data about the amount of asphalt for the year was about 8,200 tons total. The majority of the work was all the 35% recycled material this year. For ADA ramps, total, including all of the PEPI, we had 178 this year. And then looking at funding for new projects this year for bond funding, we had about $3 million of construction, and we spent almost the full $1 million for the bike ped component. But as I alluded to earlier, overall, we had one of our biggest years ever where we were about $30 million in improvements this last year.
So Katie, I just kind of want to follow up because these numbers, especially the bond paving numbers, are probably smaller than this group is used to seeing. And so it feels like a lot of these projects, a lot of the money that we spent this year was leveraging other funds and other projects rather than doing a whole bunch of standalone projects that we typically do. Is that fair?
Yes. Yes, it is. And also, there was other projects like Willamette, which adds to that fund, but we counted for it last year. And so we didn't want to double count how we show it. There was a lot of work in 2020. John, did you have a question?
Yeah, the numbers next to the ADA ramps level, is that number of ramps or is that some other dollar figure amount of expenditure?
Nope, that's the number of ramps that we upgraded this year.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm. So another piece that I wanted to talk about today is our role in the economic recovery efforts. And these next couple slides I took from a council work session that Ann Fifield from Planning presented, and she presented to council on December 16th about economic recovery. And if you're interested in following up, I would encourage you to go to the website. They have all of the materials from that presentation, as well as the recording of that meeting. And really, there was a number of really interesting things that she presented and highlighted a lot of the challenges that have come out of COVID for the economy. But really, us continuing construction is really important in keeping hundreds of people employed. And continuing to look forward and what does that look like for the next couple of years. So this graph on the screen, it shows the difference between where we were employment in October of 19 and in October of 20. And really it's showing a major decrease. You say actually the scale goes negative on the left. And really the pieces that aren't negative in the very bottom you'll see here is construction. And construction is highlighted as really one of the only sectors where we actually saw growth in that last 12-month period from October to October. So looking ahead into 21, I wanted to highlight just a couple of things. And as Jennifer mentioned, a number of projects we have going are really big picture where we're doing a lot of collaboration and a lot of leveraging our bond funds to be the most effective. So one of the pieces highlighted here in the center is the town square process that's going on. Rachel's also managing the 8th Avenue project, and we're working really closely with the town square project. And 8th Avenue itself is, it will be under construction next year, and it will be a combination of federal grant funds and bond funds. Up in the top, there's a picture of the riverfront, and we continue to work closely with that project and have bond funds leveraged in there as well. We have a project on 4th Avenue and Mill, which is adjacent to that development. And then also we have committed bike ped funds for a portion of that improvement. And then on the edge of the screen, you'll see the Central Eugene in motion map, which I mentioned earlier, included a number of improvements that will be built in this next year in the Midtown area. So not only 8th Avenue, but then the two-way conversion of Willamette Street as well. And then the table, and I know it's not legible, it's not readable at this scale, unless your eyes are way better than mine, really just to highlight the relative amount of streets that are going to take place in the next couple of years. So the first third represents 2020 and what was planned for 2020. And then the bottom 2/3 represents 2021. And part of what that shift is that when a number of us, I guess, except for Janine, this last spring, when we realized that we were going to need to shift things because of the change in the Olympic trials and the World Games, we needed to rearrange our program. And so we rearranged a number of the local street clusters specifically so that those will be out of the city core, because we want to plan to have a gap in the window of when we're not going to be doing work in the city core during the upcoming large events. So there's a number of local street clusters in West Eugene that are represented in that bottom table. So even though I said 2020 was one of the biggest years we've ever had. 2021 looks like it's on pace to be potentially even larger. And then, so going back to our agenda, checking in where we are, that was our 2020 year in review. Before we go on to the next item, which is really just review of our next meeting, are there other questions or comments, things we should talk about as a group? Gary?
Yeah. In 2020, how many bond dollars did we spend?
We spent about $3 million of bond money of 2020 for roadway. We spent our $1 million for bike ped. We also spent bond money for Willamette Street, the first half of that, which was from the old piece of bond.
Okay, I guess what I'm wondering is the volume of work we did last year of bond fund money compared to what we're going to do in 21. How many dollars are we going to spend in 21?
We will spend, when we originally looked at the 5 years, we anticipated that we were going to be in about the 9 million-ish range. And so we had originally planned 2020 was going to be a little bit of a smaller year, knowing that we had anticipated the larger track events and preparing for that. So we had anticipated we would be a little smaller, but this next year, I think we're going to be upwards of 10 million.
Won't necessarily pick up the total difference of what we anticipated in 20 versus what we did in 20 in 21.
Right, not all of it. And if remember when we looked at shifting the large events and we had some conversations about reorganizing and then potentially moving some to 24 as well, so that we could kind of a reshift all out some of that accounts out into that extra year.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, because there were some projects that we had planned for 21 that with the rescheduling of the large events, we weren't able to pick up because of the coordination with utilities and things like that. And so what we did is we talked as a group, and we talked with Matt as well to look at the collection of the bond funds will stop in 23, but we'll just have that one more year of getting bond projects just because we couldn't shuffle the projects forward. They could only be shuffled back.
Gotcha.
Sue, you're up next.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time to bring it up or not, but I was just wondering on some of these works in process, and I live in like a demolition zone up here. I'm up by the Campbell Center, and holy free holies, everything is torn up everywhere. And I was just wondering if there's any way to, I mean, the surfaces that they're leaving while these projects are happening are horrible. And the detours that Northwest Nashville had for when they were putting their thing across the river, it's like, you've got to be kidding. I've got to go across 4 different 6-lane roads to get this, right now the surface anywhere near eWeb is horrible. And it looks like it's going to be that way for quite a while since this is, all about pavement and giving people better streets. It's like, I realized in the long term, that's what we're aiming for. But in the meantime, gosh, it's pretty awful.
Yep, I hear what you're saying, and that's feedback that we've gotten in a couple of different places. And that's something we try to work with Eric's group specifically when we coordinate on timing and when construction is planned. I don't know if there's anything else, Eric, you want to add to that?
Yeah, we do get complaints. So our group, our utility coordinators, inspectors, are the ones that are in charge of, regulating and keeping an eye on utilities in the right of way when they're doing work prior to a engineering project. Once engineering gets the project, then the project manager coordinates that. So if you do see those areas, let us know, let me know. I've got direct connection to the inspectors, and we have seen some some of these projects that are lasting longer than anticipated, I would say it's difficult for some of the utilities to keep up with, managing their trenches and stuff, but we can give them a general reminder that that's their responsibility, and we'll get right on it. So.
Thanks, Eric. Janine, you were next.
I was just gonna skip because now we're talking about utilities and how bad our trenches are, so I figured I'd just let this one go. Actually, my question is just gonna reveal how little homework I've done for you inviting me to participate in your committee. Can you remind me the 5-year bond cycle is from when to when and what was the total amount?
Sure, and this will be a good memory quiz for me. So the bond was approved by the voters in 2017. We started the bond last year in 2019 was the first year of the 5-year bond. It was, Brian Richardson is going to jump in with the actual number, I think 56.2, if I remember off the top. 23 is the 5th year of the schedule to collect the funds, and we anticipate having some projects that will be completed in 2024.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. John, you had a question?
Oh, yes. So you seem to indicate that some of the projects are going to be pushed out a further year out to, I don't remember the exact date, but does that mean that we would likely not go consider another bond issue a year later than we would have otherwise?
It's not something that we have talked about yet, but I think that's a great discussion for our group, whether it's probably in the next meeting or two. But I think that it has implications, and we should at least discuss it so that we can plan ahead and look at what that cycle looks like, so that we can plan, if we want to start construction in X, what does that mean in terms of going out to a public vote? It's just not something we've discussed as a group yet, but I agree it's important to talk about.
So I do want to jump in here just because Matt and I have talked about this as far as going to council and kind of talking about transportation funding as a big picture. I know John Borofsky, if he were here, he might remind us that back before there was a street repair bond back in 2007, that there was a committee that got together and looked at transportation funding across the city and what tools there might be to fund pavement preservation as well as other transportation facilities. And at the time, the group kind of landed on a bond measure. And because of our success with that, we've now obviously renewed it 3 times. Matt and I have talked about what the timing might look like to kind of reinitiate those conversations with council to kind of talk about that, because it's now been, by the time this one ends, about 15 plus years since we've had that conversation with council. And, Matt, you might have some more information on this, but I would definitely think that this panel would be a great resource to kind of look at what your recommendations would be as far as the bond cycle and the timing. But I think that we might be at a good place to kind of have that bigger conversation and not, I know the last few years it's just been, the bonds are really successful, let's go out for another 5-year bond. But the last time we did that, I know that there were a couple of council members that also referred to that process before the bond measures to say, hey, what about these other tools that we thought about 15 years ago, and should be rethinking that again?
Yeah, you did a great job of speaking to that, Jennifer. And that's something that we can talk to counselors individually about too, and get a feel of what they're thinking as we get closer. And then I think, John, the other piece that we'll have a better picture of as we move forward is just what the calendar for bond asks on the ballot might be as we get closer, and thinking about what 4J is doing. If there's a parks bond, these other things kind of help us figure out where the right place to place this is if we do go with another bond.
Thank you for that additional background. That's really helpful. Sue, you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I was also on the Railroad Quiet Zone Committee, and I was just wondering where it stands and how, I can't remember how the funding for it was supposed to come, and how big a deal is that going to be, and how long does it take, and what, what's the update on where we stand with that?
Sure. I actually can speak to that. I've been helping with the process. So where we are in the process is it's still moving forward. It is fully funded. We have through two sources, one for the eastern 3 crossings and the other for the western 7. In terms of where we are in the process, we have over the last year had a number of meetings and coordinations and got through a number of steps with the rail partners, which we consider state rail, federal rail, and also Union Pacific, who runs on those lines. And really now we're just working through the permitting process. We've submitted our plans to them. We've had the initial buy-off from them of, yes, we know you want to do this, and we are agreeable to the design that you've submitted. So now we're working through contracts waiting on the timeline of the railroad. So what we anticipate is that as soon as we get the go-ahead from them on crossings, we will try to group them together to build as many as we can as soon as we can. But with that said, I think that we get more knowledge about the timeline the further we get. As we get a feedback loop from Union Pacific, we're able to get a little bit more data of, okay, what should we expect timeline wise? And right now we're just in a wait. We're in a wait to hear back from Union Pacific again. But in terms of design, we're working on the 3-dimensional designs of all of the crossings, and we'll be ready to construct them as soon as we get the okay from Union Pacific.
And so, well, when those involve closing the whole street for a chunk of time, or what happens?
I'll be honest and say we haven't gotten to the phasing. We haven't developed detailed traffic control plans for them yet. I could foresee that some of the crossings, it might make sense to close them during the work. And part of it is a balance of when we anticipate Union Pacific coming into town as well, because the actual crossing improvements will be a contractor doing typical street work as well. But then when you get up to the actual crossings, Union Pacific has staff that comes in and actually does the work on the crossing. So some of it is a timing piece of when our contractor will do the street portion next to it, and when Union Pacific comes in to do the actual rail. So I'm not sure what that looks like yet. It would likely be fully closed temporarily while Union Pacific is like replacing rail, or if they're replacing the surfacing that's between the tracks. But we'll know more in terms of timing as we continue to inch along in their permitting process. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, you just don't know what you don't know, So thanks.
Matt, you have a question?
Yeah, quick. I'm surprised Union Pacific hasn't gotten back to you. They're usually so prompt and attentive to requests. My question is, and maybe you're going to cover this as we talk about the next meeting, but I've always been focused on the backlog and how much gain we've made on that backlog and where we stand as a whole, which this bond was supposed to help with. So,
right. And yes, I think that will be a big piece of the next portion, our next meeting, because either Eric or Nick will likely present the payment management report that has that data. And so that's something that we'll be able to talk about in more detail during the next meeting when we have the reports available.
Okay, good. I find that interesting, and that will help dictate whether or not we go out for another bond. And I think 4J just went out for a bond. Didn't we just approve a 4J bond? Or am I mistaken? So timing might be good in a couple of years.
John, you have a question?
Yeah, you mentioned that there's funding for the quiet zone crossing changes. And I'm just concerned about where that funding is coming from, that it doesn't impact funding that was intended for street repairs spread out over the entire community, because the quiet zone only affects a relatively small portion of the entire city of Eugene. And so I don't want to, take money away from other areas of the city that would need street repairs and rehabilitations.
I think that's really valid input. I would be happy to talk to you more about it in detail offline. I'm trying to think of a great way to talk about it. So the Eastern 3 specifically are funded through urban renewal funds, which is basically future funds from what we'll get in revenue from that new district, from that whole riverfront district, what we anticipate that will produce. And typically urban renewal funds are not funds that we would otherwise allocate to other street projects. So it's not something where we're taking from a street project to give to a street project. It's a different pot of money that has been allocated for the those crossings specifically. Does that help?
Yes, I understand that urban renewal funds are not going to be specific to street repairs for the entire community. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Gary. You're on
mute, Gary.
Yeah, a couple of things. The quiet zone, we have a perception that only affects the people within, a quarter of a mile on both sides of the railroad track. But it's just interesting to know that many of the complaints that we get about the trades come out of the South Hills. The line of sight is a line of sound, and those people hear that just as much as you and I do. And I live a half a mile from the railroad tracks right now, and it doesn't bother me in the least. So that's one point. The other thing is that we're going to be talking about that report that Matt mentioned. And I got to admit, I really agree with Matt. That to me is very, very important. Is there any chance that we can get a hard copy of that before the meeting?
Yes.
I put notes all through these, and I've got everyone since the start. And that would be, at least it would be good for me. Thank you.
I think that's very possible. I know in the past that we've had hard copies available. And I don't think that we have the logistics of that ironed out yet because we're in this new environment, but we'd be happy to give you a hard copy of that and the bond report so that we have some time to look at it and you can have a hard copy. So let's see, Gary, you're the only one that shows a hand up still. Does anybody else have any questions or items we should talk about before it's a good transition into talking about the next meeting.
Yes, I would second Gary's request for some hard copies of some of the reports and so forth that we can, at our leisure, take a more detailed look at.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. That's great input. We can make that happen. So looking ahead to our future meeting schedule, our next meeting is the 17th of February, and that will be our more typical second meeting where we do go over those reports. We're showing that Wednesday, 3 to 4:30, and it is our intent that will be in this virtual world as well. Certainly, we will continue to be flexible, and as the situation continues to evolve, we may change in the future, but for right now, we intend that second meeting will be formatted much like we are today. Let's see, is there any questions or other items that we should consider or add to the agenda for the second meeting? Okay, well, if that's it, then we'll just go ahead, we'll adjourn. I'll say thank you very much for coming on our little tour today of our projects. And I really looking forward to us meeting again in another month. And I will make sure that we get hard copies to everybody prior to that meeting. If there's nothing else, I hope everybody has a great afternoon. Thank you for coming, and we will see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, bye.
Janine, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I'm gonna follow up with an email.
That's fine. And I would be happy to get together and talk about the kind of the process and history and give you some more information. Fire hose information at you if you would like, as much as you're interested. So you just reach out and let me know.
Thank you. Mostly, I just want to know how my input can be most helpful to you. I know like the general, to make sure that the funds are spent appropriately, but, I don't know if you guys are having house parties or, buying keggers or, so obviously we're not getting into that level of detail, but it would just be, since I haven't been part of these processes, maybe just how can a community member who doesn't know a whole lot about these projects, except incidentally, provide feedback that's useful to you. So
Sure.
So just before since you have Janine here, I think Mel kind of filled two roles. One is that, you are a City of Eugene resident. So this is your money that is being paid towards, street repair. So you have that interest. But I mean, don't discount the interest that you are representing eWeb. And there was kind of a point in the meeting here today that I think, I decided not to jump in, but I think that there was an opportunity to kind of jump in and talk about, how much the partnership between the city and eWeb has evolved over the last few years around street repair projects. And it seems like every year we're trying to make improvements so that we are better coordinated. There's things that we're trying to do to try to lessen the amount of time that streets are impacted by eWeb's work followed by our work. So we're looking for ways that we can kind of combine that work.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's part of the real value that you can bring to this is kind of talking about the places where we've improved around that.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to serve in this role, was just to kind of help formalize that relationship and look for those opportunities and, kind of just continue down that path of, we've spent so many years there's like lots of old baggage with other folks who worked in both of our organizations. And I think we've just really tried to just start fresh and find ways to use money the most, knowing that both of our processes take a long time. The same people are paying for them.
Exactly.
Pain in the ass, is there a way that we can do this more efficiently and not get as many complaints from the community members? And I think, my third party, observation is that we've made so much progress. So yeah.
We have made progress.
Support and, provide some examples of that, but also just being new to the group, I didn't want to dominate or take us down a side path that, I might not be able to answer a lot of questions about because I'm not, up to my eyeballs in the projects themselves. So
I think that the question that was brought up around the temporary surfacing is one that we continue to struggle and work around. And I think sometimes with eWeb, I know that eWeb has talked about being open to us including the water work in our construction contract instead of having separate contractors and having them be sequential and having them be, concurrent. That's something that I think that we're still working on. I don't know that we've ever really put that together on a street project yet. So to me, that's kind of the next step, the next evolution for us.
I think that MOU we just updated kind of tried to open that up with some sideboards to allow that if it made sense in certain situations to allow for more,
right.
Same contractor doing similar kinds of infrastructure work.
Right. So for sure, the MOU kind of definitely clarified that that is the next evolution of our partnership. We just haven't implemented it yet. We've kind of talked about it, explored it on some projects. I know that we implemented it a little bit on the Amazon Active Corridor project where we built those bridges. And, and I know that our contractor did some work, some eWeb work as part of that, more than just kind of the typical valve adjustment type of work. But I do feel like that's kind of the next evolution, which could potentially really decrease the amount of like that temporary surfacing complaint issue that we're having on a lot of projects.
This makes me wonder, do you think it would make sense, Katie, for us to have our kind of like project preview before this group meets next time, just to kind of like use that as an example of how we, we meet annually and we look at each other's project list and here's some that we're kind of coordinating on. I wonder if we want to try to have that meeting ahead of the next one of these community meetings, just as a tangible way that we're kind of coordinating our work. And I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
we haven't done it remotely before, but I'm happy to put something on calendars, or you and I can email and try to find some dates that work for folks.
Yeah, because
Sure,
it seems
that sounds
like
great.
typically we would have that, say like last July, we would have been having that meeting in anticipation of 2021, but in the COVID craziness.
Right.
And, you know, and part of it is just that time goes at the supersonic speed, that things that we intend to have happen, we end up missing by about 3 or 4 months because the time just got away from us and we have no idea where it went.
Yeah. Here we are. It's like the end of January. I don't know.
Is it September or is it 2021?
My
Yeah.
daughter called the summer warm March, and then the fall was cold March, and I don't know. Now we're just gonna, it's just March all year round. I don't know. So, well,
Great.
I
I would
shop
look
around
forward-
for some dates,
That
and
sounds great.
can definitely do that. And then just let me know how I can be most helpful, because I guess I need a little bit of what to look for in these projects. Or of course, I always just want to ask, are the fire hydrants getting replaced? Because that's like my little pet. Just like walk around my neighborhood, I'm like, oh my God, that street looks great, but why is there that shitty hydrant? So everyone has their own little like thing, right?
That's right.
So
All right.
all right, well, thank you ladies. I'll follow up with an email.
Okay,
That sounds
thanks.
just
Bye.
great. Thank you.
Awesome.
Good afternoon. Bye.